Hey, Grandpa, you need help with that museum relic? Or are you just buffing it for another 50 years? The voice, laced with the easy arrogance of youth, cut through the quiet focus of the hangar. Elias Hawthorne, 87 years old, didn't react. His hand, knotted but firm, kept its slow, circular movement, removing a barely visible mark from the silver body of the P-51 Mustang. He sensed their stares on his back, a blend of entertainment and irritation. There were three of them, young airmen in their neat uniforms posing near the huge hangar door. One of them, a senior airman with his name Ramirez stitched above his pocket, moved forward. "I'm serious, old-timer. Do you have a work order for this? This is a restricted zone." Elias finished his circular wipe, his eyes locked on the reflection in the shiny aluminum. He could see the warped shapes of the young men behind him, and beyond them the blue sky of a calm afternoon. He stayed quiet. His silence appeared to provoke them, challenging their presumed power. It was a silence rooted not in frailty, but in a patience they couldn't grasp. The second airman joined in, poking his friend. "My grandpa has one of these as a plastic model kit. Maybe you should begin there, Pop. Less risk of you damaging something." A soft laugh spread among them. Ramirez took another step, his boots resounding on the smooth concrete floor. The hangar was enormous, a temple of flight, and their voices seemed to desecrate the sacred area. In the bays around them sat the sleek gray hunters of the current Air Force, F-22s and F-35s. But here in Bay 4 was this antique, this specter from a past war. Valiant Lady, the name was painted in graceful curving letters just below the cockpit. She was Elias's plane, not his in title perhaps. She belonged to a private owner who paid the base a large amount for hangar space and restoration privileges. But his in-spirit, he had bled in her. He had prayed in her. He had seen friends perish from her cockpit. "I asked you a question," Ramirez insisted, his tone growing harsher. Now slowly, deliberately, Elias straightened his back. The action was rigid, joined by a gentle groan of protesting joints. He turned to confront them, his eyes pale blue and dimmed with age, containing a profundity that made the young airman instinctively retreat half a step. There was no fury in his face, only a deep exhaustion. He reached into the inner pocket of his worn brown leather jacket, the same one he'd worn for 40 years. The airmen swapped looks, their grins coming back. This was the segment of the spectacle they relished, the clumsy old man searching for his documents. The clash had attracted a small crowd. A few other mechanics, pausing from the intricacies of fifth-generation fighters, rested against tool chests, observing the scene develop. The air was heavy with the odor of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid. But here, around the Mustang, there was another aroma. Old leather, oil, and something else. History. Ramirez was the leader of his little group, inflated with the assurance of his rank and youth. He viewed an old man, weak and misplaced. He viewed a bother. He couldn't perceive the phantom of the 20-year-old pilot who resided behind those weary eyes. He couldn't hear the rumble of 1,000 Merlin engines thundering in the old man's recollection. "Come on, we don't have all day," Ramirez said, snapping his fingers. Elias's hand came out from his jacket, clutching a plain laminated civilian ID card. Ramirez grabbed it from his hold, eyeing it with exaggerated scorn. Elias Hawthorne. "Cute. Your parents had a sense of humor." "That's his name," a new voice stated. It was steady, even, and bore an authority that the airman's shouting missed. Lieutenant Jordan Hale, a young officer scarcely a year out of the academy, had entered the hangar. He'd been heading to a pre-flight meeting when he noticed the group of airmen harassing the old man. Something in their posture, the predatory encircling, the belittling motion set his teeth on edge. Ramirez, briefly unsettled by the officer's arrival, stood taller. "Sir, this man was in a restricted area without a proper escort or work order." "He has clearance," Hale said, his eyes not on Ramirez but on the P-51. The wing commander himself approved it. This aircraft is part of the Heritage Flight Program. He had read the memo. He was a history enthusiast, and the presence of a real combat-flown P-51 on his base was a cause of personal thrill. The airman shrank a bit, but Ramirez wasn't prepared to abandon his dominance display. He was still gripping Elias's ID. "Well, he should have spoken up, sir, and he should have his credentials displayed." His gaze dropped back to Elias, who was now reaching into his jacket again. this time for his wallet to store his ID away. "What else you got in there, Grandpa?" Ramirez said, his boldness returning. A P card, pictures of the grandkids. In a quick, astonishingly rude action, he extended his hand and snatched the worn leather wallet from Elias's grasp before he could secure it. It was a move too extreme. The other mechanics shifted uneasily. Lieutenant Jordan Hale's jaw clenched. Ramirez opened the wallet. A small folded black and white photo drifted to the concrete floor. It depicted a group of incredibly young men in flight attire, smiling in front of this very same P-51. Ramirez mocked. "Look at this! From the Stone Age!" He rummaged through the wallet's compartments, his fingers awkward and invasive. And then he spotted it. Tucked into a concealed flap of worn leather was a small, dulled silver pin. It was a pair of wings, but they were distinct from the standard ones he was accustomed to. They were weightier, more elaborate, with a star in the center, combat pilot wings. As Ramirez's irreverent fingers touched the pin, the sterile quiet of the hangar vanished from Elias's mind. He was no longer an old man being shamed. For a split second, the world faded into a burst of fierce memory. The pounding roar of the Mustang's engine filled his ears, so loud it was a tangible force. The sky outside his canopy wasn't blue, but a grimy, smoke-filled gray, dotted with the black bursts of flak. The air reeked of cordite. He could feel the familiar fierce shake of the .50 caliber machine guns firing in their mounts, the tremor running through the stick, up his arm, and into his very bones. AF Wolf 190, trailing black smoke, spun past his wing. The memory lasted less than a heartbeat, a raw echo of a life on the brink of death. And then it was gone. He was back in the silent hangar, the scent of jet fuel once more replacing the cordite. He looked at the young man holding his past in his hands and felt nothing but a vast, empty pity. Lieutenant Jordan Hale witnessed the entire event. He saw the wallet taken, the photo drop, the airman's sneer. He saw the spark in the old man's eyes, a brief flame that was nearly alarming in its strength before it faded back into that disturbing calm. He knew he was seeing something deeply incorrect. The name on the ID Hawthorne clicked with the name of the plane Valiant Lady. His mind hurried, linking points from articles and history books he'd absorbed. It couldn't be, could it, Ramirez? Unaware, was holding the wallet up like a prize. "All right, that's it. You've had your opportunity," he said, taking out his phone. "I'm calling security forces. We'll have you removed from the base. Maybe they'll suggest a nice psych evaluation to check if you're suitable to be roaming around an active airfield." He was gazing at Elias, but he was performing for the crowd, for his companions, for the officer he aimed to impress with his vigilance. He was enjoying the degradation, driving it to its utmost height. As Ramirez started to dial, Lieutenant Jordan Hale stepped back into the shadows of a huge F-22 wing. He drew out his own phone. He wasn't contacting security. He scrolled through his contacts and pressed the number for the wing command post, the central hub of the whole base. "This is Lieutenant Hale in Hangar 4, he said, his voice quiet but pressing. "I have a situation here. There is an elderly civilian." "Yes, sir. The man restoring the P-51 Mustang." He paused, listening. "His name is Elias Hawthorne." He spelled it out. Hawthorne. He is currently being held by Senior Airman Ramirez. Hale selected his words cautiously. "Sir, I believe you need to get the wing commander right away." The voice on the other end, at first bored and administrative, shifted immediately. There was a muffled yell, the sound of a chair pushed back forcefully. The crowd couldn't hear the words, but the abrupt change in tone was clear. Assistance was not just coming. The reinforcements had been mobilized. Inside the wing command building, Colonel Victor Kane was on the phone, his face a storm of irritation. An unplanned call from the command post about a hangar disagreement was the last thing he required. "What is it, Lieutenant?" he said, his voice sharp. "Sir, it's about the civilian in Hangar 4, Hale said. "The one with the Mustang. His name is Elias Hawthorne." The name lingered in the air for a moment. Colonel Kane's whole stance altered. He went from reclining in his leather chair to sitting straight up, his knuckles white on the receiver. His eyes shot to a framed print on his office wall, A painting of P-51s from the 357th Fighter Group engaged in a dogfight over Germany. "Say that name again, Lieutenant," the colonel ordered, his voice now perilously soft. "Hawthorne, sir. Elias Hawthorne." Colonel Kane slammed the phone down, not into its holder, but onto the desk. "Sergeant," he bellowed at his aide, "get my car now and get Dr. Elias Hawthorne from the base historian's office on the line. Tell him to meet me at Hangar 4 immediately." The aide, a young staff sergeant, hurried to obey, surprised by the intense urgency in his commander's voice. "Sir, is everything all right?" Kane was already putting on his service coat, his actions crisp and exact. "Do you have any notion who that is?" he said, his voice a low snarl of disbelief and anger. "That's not just an Elias Hawthorne. That's the Elias Hawthorne. They called him the Ghost of Bastogne. We have a living Medal of Honor recipient on our base, and my airmen are." He stopped, his jaw tightened so firmly a muscle twitched. God help them. The audience in the colonel's office was just his aide, but the meaning was evident. A boundary had been violated that they didn't even recognize. Back in Hangar 4, Senior Airman Ramirez was relishing the last instance of his control. Lieutenant Hale had withdrawn, and the old man was just standing there, a mute figure of resistance. Ramirez had his phone to his ear, a pretend dialogue for impact. "Yes, this is Senior Airman Ramirez. I have an unauthorized civilian in Hangar 4 who is refusing to comply. He was crafting his narrative, depicting himself as the careful protector of base security, asking for a patrol to remove him from the premises. Possible mental disorientation. It was a despicable act, a final, conceited excess from which there would be no comeback. He was so absorbed in his own theater that he didn't notice it initially, the faint, far-off sound of a siren. But it wasn't a single siren. It was a group. The noise increased rapidly, shrieking nearer. A black staff car, lights flashing but siren now silent, skidded to a stop just outside the massive bay doors, obstructing the afternoon sun. It was followed right away by a security forces truck and a white command van. The usual pace of the base had just been disrupted. The hangar became completely silent. The mechanics ceased leaning and stood at attention. Ramirez froze, his phone still at his ear, his mouth slightly open. The doors of the black car flew open. Colonel Kane emerged, his uniform perfect, his face a veil of restrained fury. He was followed by a chief master sergeant, the top-ranking enlisted man on the base, and a flustered-looking civilian holding a tablet. Dr. Elias Hawthorne, the base historian. They didn't walk, they strode. Their footsteps resounded with a determination that drained all the air from the immense space. They marched past the frozen airmen as if they were unseen, their attention fully on the old man standing next to the vintage fighter plane. Colonel Kane stopped 3 paces in front of Elias Hawthorne. In the resounding silence, he planted his feet, brought his heels together, and performed the crispest, most sincere salute of his whole career. His hand was a sharp edge trembling with force, his eyes fixed on Elias's. "Mr. Hawthorne," the colonel's voice echoed, booming through the hangar. "It is an absolute honor to have you on my base, sir." Elias, who had observed the arrival with a composed, aware expression, slowly lifted a hand in a weak echo of a salute. It was less a military motion and more a straightforward recognition. Man to man, the colonel maintained his salute, his arm rigid. He turned his head just enough to pin Senior Airman Ramirez with a stare that could have liquefied metal. "Airman," he thundered, the sound causing Ramirez to flinch. "Do you have any earthly notion who you are addressing?" He didn't pause for a response that would never arrive. He motioned to the historian. "Dr. Thorne, if you would," the historian advanced, his hands shaking a little as he swiped his tablet. "Elias Hawthorne," he started, his voice adopting the rhythm of a formal statement, "enlisted in the Army Air Forces in 1943. Assigned to the 357th Fighter Group, the Oxford Boys, he flew 140 combat missions in the European Theater of Operations, flying this very aircraft, P-51 Mustang, serial number 4472123, which he named Valiant Lady." A shared, barely heard gasp passed through the gathered airmen and mechanics. Ramirez's face had shifted from arrogant to puzzled to completely devastatingly white. The historian went on, his voice becoming firmer. He is credited with 22 confirmed aerial victories, making him a triple ace. His awards include the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star with 3 oak leaf clusters, the Distinguished Flying Cross with a silver cluster, and the Congressional Medal of Honor. The last 4 words dropped into the silence like heavy weights. Medal of Honor, the highest, most revered award. The airmen regarded Elias not as an old man, but as a being from a myth. The Medal of Honor was given for his actions on December 24, 1944. Dr. Thorne read, his voice filled with feeling, during the siege of Bastogne, then Captain Hawthorne, flying alone after his squadron was dispersed, engaged a group of 12 German Junkers, 88 bombers aiming at the surrounded and besieged 101st Airborne Division. Despite serious damage to his aircraft and a severe shrapnel injury to his leg, he single-handedly disrupted their bombing attack, shooting down 4 of the bombers and dispersing the others before guiding his damaged aircraft back to Allied territory. His actions are directly credited with preserving the lives of hundreds of American soldiers on the ground that day. The tail lingered in the air, vast and diminishing. The power structure in the hangar had not just been reversed, it had been destroyed. Colonel Kane dropped his salute, but his eyes stayed on Ramirez. Inside Mr. Hawthorne's wallet, he said, his voice perilously low, which I believe you are still holding, you will find his original hand-engraved combat pilot wings. They were attached to his uniform by General Jimmy Doolittle himself. Shaking, Ramirez glanced down at the wallet in his hand as if it were hazardous. Colonel Kane stepped toward the young airman, his shadow covering him. You are ashamed of that uniform, he hissed. To this Air Force, to all that those wings on your chest are meant to symbolize. You look at this man, and you see a hindrance. You see a mark for your pitiful playground taunts. I see the man who soared through hell itself to ensure the very liberty you assume every single day you awaken. He turned to the Chief Master Sergeant, who was waiting with a notepad. Chief, I want their names, all 3 of them. They will be reporting to my office at 0600 tomorrow morning for a personal, and I promise you, very rigorous lesson in Air Force heritage. They will begin by composing a 10,000-word essay on the history of the 357th Fighter Group. Then we'll determine if they are suitable to keep wearing this uniform. The airmen, headed by Ramirez, started to stutter, their words a weak mix of sir and sorry. Elias raised a hand. The motion was minor, but it drew the focus of everyone in the space. He looked at Ramirez, and in his eyes there was no wrath. There was no victory. There was only a profound, tired sorrow that was somehow more condemning than the colonel's fury. Son, Elias said, his voice rough, but resounding clearly in the hushed hangar. This plane, he patted the cool metal of Valiant Lady's body. She isn't just a device, she's not just metal and paint and wire. She's a vow. She's a vow that boys my age, terrified, thousands of miles from home, made to other boys who were perishing on the ground. We didn't battle for parades. We didn't do it for the medals. He looked from Ramirez to the other young men. We did it for each other. Respect isn't about saluting a uniform or dreading a rank. It's about grasping the vows that were honored so you could be standing here secure in this hangar today. The colonel, his face easing a bit, carefully took the wallet from Ramirez's limp fingers and returned it to its proper owner. Elias accepted it, his fingers following the cracked leather. He opened it and gazed down at the dulled silver wings nestled in their hidden compartment. The world faded again, not into brutality, but into a serene, deep memory. He was 20 years old again, reclining on a cot in a muddy field hospital. His leg ached. The air smelled of antiseptic and moist soil. A figure loomed over him, a man with stars on his collar. General Doolittle. The general's hand was on his shoulder, warm and steady. You saved a lot of lives today, son. The general's voice resounded in his mind. A lot of boys are going home to their families because of you. Don't ever forget why you fight. The memory wasn't about the splendor of the instant, but the burden of it, the duty, the vow. The consequences were rapid and firm. The next morning, Ramirez and his 2 friends found themselves not in the colonel's office, but in a plain classroom with Dr. Elias Hawthorne for the first of many extended sessions on military history and heritage. Colonel Kane, faithful to his promise, required a new base-wide training initiative centered on the efforts and sacrifices of earlier generations, with the account of Elias Hawthorne and Valiant Lady as its initial section. A formal apology letter signed by the colonel himself was displayed on every bulletin board on the base. A week went by. The talk about the event in Hangar 4 gradually diminished into the flow of everyday activities. One evening, Ramirez, off-duty and in civilian attire, found himself passing the hangars. He noticed that the main door to Bay 4 was partly open, a warm yellow glow spilling out onto the pavement. He paused, his heart racing. Then he inhaled and stepped inside. Elias was there just as before, silently polishing a part of the Mustang's wing. He didn't appear to see Ramirez at first. The young man lingered in the shadows for a prolonged moment, struggling with his guilt. At last, he found his voice. "Sir," he said, the words faint in the large area. Elias halted his task and turned. He regarded Ramirez, truly regarded him, and saw not the conceited intimidator from the week prior, but a chastened young man, his eyes brimming with a remorse that was profound and sincere. "Sir," Ramirez started again, his voice breaking. I was hoping, could you tell me about her, about Valiant Lady?" Elias Hawthorne maintained his gaze for a long instant. Then a small, true smile reached the edges of his mouth, the first one Ramirez had ever witnessed. It changed his face, dispelling some of the fatigue. He motioned with his rag toward an old wooden crate nearby. "Pull up a crate, son," Elias said, patting the shining silver wing of his old warbird. "Let me tell you about the time her engine sputtered its final breath over the Ardennes." The courage of heroes like Elias Hawthorne should never be forgotten. If you were touched by his story, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to BR Veteran Stories for more incredible stories of service and sacrifice.